What's up, everybody? Welcome into the F6 Football Podcast. Cam Copeland here joining you with Alex Roglin. And yeah, we may have missed last week because life got in the way, but we are back with you this week. And right before the show, Alex was just over there gloating away with his preseason Super Bowl pick of the Chiefs over the Niners. He got both teams right. I will bow down and throw it over to him. How are you doing, man?
Well, I'm doing well, Cam. But I mean, we do need to remind the audience about. I don't even remember what my record ended up for my upset picks, but you definitely beat me in that category. I think I ended up being like 3-12 or something like that, really bad. But yeah, I mean, before the season started, of course, everyone knows, big Chiefs fan. So obviously, I always had had belief in my team. But I mean, I think it's clear that the 49ers have, the probably the deepest roster in the NFL, or at least arguably there. So, it's interesting. I mean, we'll recap a little bit of the championship games. I know we'll get into talking about the Super Bowl, which we'll actually be able to do probably get to do an even more in-depth show in the Super Bowl next week, since we have that extra week to wait. We can do a little sneak peek at that. And then, of course, I want to hear your thoughts on some of the coaching changes as those start to shake out as well. But looking back, if we start back at Championship Sunday, going into that game, it was, I felt confident, coming off of a game against the Bills, which was a tough game on the road. I know a lot of folks had question marks about how Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs would travel on the road in the playoffs. I had no worries because, Mahomes is just ice in the playoffs. Wherever it's at, he's just a beast. And even during the regular season, the Chiefs had actually been better on the road than at home this past season. So the Road Warriors made it happen. Showed up in Baltimore. There were some pregame shenanigans that was interesting. A little bit of gamesmanship on both sides, but I think one of the things that impressed me the most about the Chiefs game was how the Chiefs, I think the Ravens have really they've really had that kind of culture and identity of being those bullies, right? They want to hit hard, and they want to come quickly and fast, and I don't know, and I think they've kind of lived off that. And I think the Chiefs were probably the only team this year, at least when I look at it, where came out of the gate and just punched them right in the face, right? And we're like, we're not going to let you bully us. We're not going to let you guys just run around and do whatever you want and think that you can just bully us around. We're the champs. And they came out and hit him in the face. And honestly, it seemed like the Ravens never really, other than that first touchdown drive, they seemed so out of sync and just uncharacteristic the rest of that game. But that's what happens when you play the champs. So everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, right?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of that game, and it's what people are talking about the most from that game, it does fall on the shoulders of Lamar Jackson, right? He was a completely different person, a completely different player that game. He had, here, I'm looking at it right now. He did have 54 rushing yards, but there was a clip of Odell Beckham Jr. talking to him during the game, and he was basically just saying, what are you doing, man? Would take off running. Like, the game changes when you run. And so many of Lamar's drop back passes, he wasn't even, not extending the play or getting outside the pocket on his toes or something. He was flat-footed, standing perfectly still.
Mm-hmm.
It just didn't look like the same human being, frankly, in there. And obviously these are both great teams, and the Chiefs deserve the win. They pulled it out, but the Baltimore defense played well, right? They showed up. A lot of the skill players for Baltimore, held them to 0 in the second half. A lot of the skill players for Baltimore showed up, and it just, sometimes things just don't go your way. I get it, but I talked, I think just 2 weeks ago on this podcast, Alex, about how people were all up in arms about Dak, saying get rid of him. And I was saying, the narrative that used to be there with Lamar Jackson, that Lamar always chokes in the playoffs, now that's being applied to Dak. Well, it's still being applied to Lamar Jackson. And honestly, until he can prove himself otherwise, it's always a little ridiculous to think that someone so talented can't pull it through. But he's just hasn't shown up to this point that he can. And you
Mhm.
only ever the best players only get a handful of chances in their
No,
entire careers.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I like the point you brought up, Cam. And I would not, when I think about Lamar Jackson compared to Josh Allen in their playoff performances, I mean they couldn't be further apart, right?
Right.
Josh Allen has not gotten over the hump, but in most cases, it feels to me like the Bills coaching and the other Bills players have let Josh Allen down. Like none of the losses over the last 3 years feel like they are Josh Allen's fault at all. If anything, he's had probably some of the best statistics in play in the playoffs. I mean, he passes the eye test, passes the statistical test, and if you look at quarterbacks that haven't got it done, he's certainly up there as far as how much he's played. But Lamar, every playoff game you go back and you scratch your head that he's been in, even the ones he won, right? He barely won that game. Was it 2 years ago against the Dolphins? I think they won a game, and then I believe that was a backup quarterback, if I'm even remembering that right. And then he won the other playoff game against the Texans this year. But even in that game, he looked off in the first half, and then once he started running, got more comfortable there in the second half. But I think I don't know if it's just a mental thing. Some guys, like you said, they just gotta. Some guys just I don't know if they just want it so bad that they almost try too hard, And it's certainly not effort with Lamar. I mean, you can see how much the guy wants to win,
Oh
and
yeah.
is very driven and is deserving, right, of his second MVP. But he reminds me of an early year Peyton Manning, right? Because this was the exact thing that would happen with Peyton Manning, right? He would have these phenomenal years and these amazing statistics, and then every year he would get in the playoffs, and then it's like, who is this guy? He's missing throws. He gets happy feet in the pocket, and he's just unable to, year after year. They would, year after year, the Colts would be, usually losing to teams they shouldn't in the playoffs. And it wasn't until he really wasn't until he had that big game when he was with the Colts, so they finally got over the hurdle against the Patriots, and then he got him again later on when he was on the Broncos. But and I'm not saying Lamar Jackson, is going to, I'm not saying he's going to be Peyton Manning, but as far as the narrative around him, he's going to have to. I mean, Manning did eventually break over the hump, beat Brady, and win a Super Bowl with the Colts, and then again with the Broncos. All of that one was kind of late in his career. So the only way that Lamar, I mean, people can talk. Lamar can say what he wants. His teammates can say whatever they want, but at some point, because we know that as much as you love or as much as you might. Most people might hate the Chiefs are not going anywhere. Patrick Mahomes is 28. Andy Reid is very, very unlikely to retire, and their team is young. So at some point, to get over the hump, Lamar's going to have to beat the Chiefs in the playoffs, home or away. He's going to have to get it done. And until he gets that done, he's going to have this narrative around him.
Yeah, and well, first of all, that's the first time Lamar Jackson's ever been compared to Peyton Manning. But you definitely make a good point. And honestly, Lamar Jackson just turned 27 under a month ago, right? He's going to be 27 years old for the entire duration of the 2024 season, excluding, the Super Bowl if he ends up actually getting there. But he's still a very young player. That said, the way he plays the game is not as sustainable as someone like Peyton Manning, right? He's not going to be playing like he's playing for another 10 years. He just can't. And as talented as he is as a passer, which I do think he's a good passer, he's never going to be the passer of Peyton Manning, right? So while he's young, he just signed a massive contract. His window is to fix this internal issue. It's a little bit smaller than some of the other quarterbacks we're talking about who are in that 27, 28 year range.
Yeah, I agree. So before we move off this game, Cam, I wanted to get your thought on from a strategic perspective. Right, we've talked about Lamar, and some of this is on Lamar. Right, we don't have to go through all of the good or bad plays. He had a couple incredible plays. His touchdown to Zay Flowers was awesome. That was really a great play, avoiding the sack and nice dime thrown downfield. But then obviously thrown into triple coverage late in the game, that was a backbreaker. That just can't happen. So that one was on Lamar. But I want to hear your thoughts on, that was a bad decision. I'm sure he'll want that one back. But I want to hear your thoughts, though, on why do you think the Ravens were so hesitant to run the ball, not just with Lamar, but with their running backs. If you look, I'm going to go back and check, but I want to say they had 6 carries the entire game with running backs. And the thing that's so mind-boggling to me, even as a Chiefs fan, is that's really the only weakness in the Chiefs defense is their run defense. And obviously we'll talk about how that's going to impact the Super Bowl. But I mean, the Chiefs pass defense all year was elite. They have elite cornerbacks and defensive backs. And so it's like, if there's any cracks in that defense, that's where they should have been running the ball with Gus Edwards up the middle. And they just instead, and this to me is not on Lamar. This is on the coaching staff, right?
100%.
Why in the world would you just spend the entire game having Lamar take a five-step drop and hope to not get sacked while he's trying to throw the ball downfield? Like, that is the level of effort that you're putting on that is just incredibly high. So what are your thoughts? Why do you think they strayed away from the run game so quickly? They had abandoned it and never came back.
Well, first of all, I'll say I am not a sports psychologist. I can't really get in the heads of these people. Actually, fun fact, I got a C in sports psychology in college because I was sick the whole semester, and my professor didn't believe that I was actually sick. But anyway, we won't go harp on that. The play calling suffers too, right? It's not just the guys on the field who have the mental aspect of the game affect them. It's everyone in the organization. In high pressure situations, things go wrong for everyone. And honestly, I don't see a logical reason why they abandoned the run so quickly, right? Gus Edwards had 3 carries. Justice Hill had 3 carries. Now, Justice Hill had 3 yards, but Gus Edwards had 20 yards, right? That's almost
nice,
7.
Like 15-yard run.
Yeah.
Pretty early, yeah.
Yeah, and the game was close. I mean, the entire game,
mm-hmm.
right? It was 7-7 in the first quarter, and then the Chiefs pulled ahead in the second. So it was 17-7 going into the half.
Yep.
17-7 doesn't mean abandon the run, right? 37-7 means abandon the run. Yep. 27-7, maybe. If you're a good run team, you still do it. I mean, this team can run the ball as well as anyone in the league, and they just didn't. And as much as everyone wants to poach in their entire coaching staff, now, albeit a lot of that's on the defense, right? Mm-hmm. For instance, Mike McDonald is now the new head coach for the Seattle Seahawks, but we'll get more into that a little bit later. It's just baffling, really. And if you are a Ravens fan or someone who watches the Ravens more closely than we do, please reach out and tell us why they did this, because to me, it genuinely just is illogical.
Yeah. That I mean, I even remember watching the game. I mean, of course, I remember watching the game, but I remember
you remember watching
the
game.
During the game, just wondering, man, why aren't they running the ball? I but obviously I was excited that they were doing the hardest thing, which was to continuously put themselves in 3rd and long and then try to stand in the pocket and throw downfield against McDuffie and Snead and Reed and all those boys. And
37 passing attempts.
Yeah, that's not the recipe to beat the Chiefs. And that ain't going to be for the Niners either. If the Niners throw the ball 40 times, they're losing. I'll tell you that now. And they know that. I'm sure if we know that, Shanahan knows that.
Exactly.
But one other thing I will say on the Ravens is I certainly think the Ravens, they have a good young roster. I think they'll be back again next year in the mix. And hopefully they can really learn from this, because one other thing that you saw in this game was, the Chiefs, they understand, they've been there enough that they don't do the stupid mistakes. And I'm not saying they never do, right? Like in the previous game, Hardman had a fumble against the Bills. That was stupid, to reach across and have that happen. But I mean, there was numerous times in this game against the Ravens where, once again, I understand you want to set the physical tone, right? But you got to do it between the whistle. Multiple roughing the passers that were obvious and just stupid. Obviously, there was taunting play, couple 15-yard taunting penalties, against the Ravens. And it's like, it's obviously not home cooking, right? Because the Chiefs are the away team, but you just got to be smarter than that. Like, you got to know that, Zay Flowers made a great play. Well, don't stand over L'Jarius Sneed and do your flexing and cursing and you know, all that. Like, you can't do that. They call that. They always call that. You know, it's like, it was just stupid. And of course, that was the same drive that ended up with the Zay Flowers fumble. You know, now that was not stupid. I don't think that guy was just making a play. You got to give L'Jarius Sneed credit on that one, because that was an incredible punch out. But I guess my point is like, you gotta, you know, the Chiefs, they're not fazed by any of that stuff. You know, they can run hot a little bit, but not they don't do the stupid penalties, and that's part of the coaching staff. So, you know, Harbaugh's got to get the boys ready next year and make sure they don't make stupid penalties and hurt themselves.
Yeah. I mean, almost got to feel sorry for Zay Flowers after that fumble, because I know he was in his head after that penalty that he drew.
For sure, yeah, he didn't look the same after that, for sure. So
now I'll ask you, Alex, again before leaving this game, one last question: how much money does L'Jarius Sneed make this offseason? And does he leave the team?
That's tough. I think he's going to stay with the Chiefs, but I think that means that Jones is going to walk. I know the Chiefs, the Chiefs they don't have the space for both of them, especially if they try to go out and get a wide receiver, because there's a couple wide receivers that are going to be on the market that are going to cost some money, and I think they'll be worth it. T. Higgins, anybody? Brandon Ayuk, you know? So some of those guys will be available most likely. You know, coming up this.
I don't think Ayuk's.
I thought Ayuk was coming up. Thought I saw him on the list.
No, he they must have picked up his 5th-year option for next year.
Okay. All right. Well, then either way, though. So I don't think the Chiefs are going to be able to keep both. So I think they're going to go with Sneed because he's obviously younger and he's just continues to be an ascending player. As much as Chris Jones is, you know, I think I think Chris Jones is a future Hall of Famer, especially if he keeps up his pace at where he's at being an elite interior defensive lineman. He's just gonna get too much money. You know, the Chiefs were able to keep him around one more year to play out the end of his contract, but I think he leaves, which leaves the Chiefs, I think, to give a pretty. I don't think it'll be top of market with Sneed, because the Chiefs just don't do that. They're similar to, I think, some of the older dynasty regimes where you know, they'll give Sneed, you know, a decent contract, I think, to keep him to stay around, but they're not going to give him top of market, because they only pay one guy top of market, and that's Patrick Mahomes. Everybody else, just, you know, if you want to be a part of the dynasty and keep it going, then they're just not going to pay you at the very top.
I think there's a good chance they franchise tag him, right? Unless there's something I don't know. And
for sure. No, I think if they can't get it done, they're definitely on the table, because he has been ascending every year, and he was elite this entire year. But if you want to see a good highlight reel, I know you throw suggestions out to me. Just type in like L'Jarius Sneed stuffing people at the line. And like, you know, like jamming the dude he's so
Tyreek.
He's big and strong. And even Tyreek made a joke about it after that in that playoff game. There's a play where he jams Tyreek so hard that he literally jams him into the ground, like he's blocking him. And Tyreek was trying to run a route. Like Sneed just got up on him and just perfect timing, got him off balance. And I mean, and even I think Tyreek said he jammed me to Cam Coon or something like that, which is pretty funny. But anyway, so yeah, I think he's either franchise tagged or he's you know, maybe a 3-year deal, something like that. And sad enough, I think Jones is gone. I think unless he takes less money to stay because he loves the Chiefs, I think he's gone. And that is a little sad to me. Because obviously he's been an absolute cornerstone of the Chiefs defense through this dynasty run. So it'll be sad to see him go, but you know, Chiefs can't pay him $30 million a year. It just ain't happening.
No. And I do think that personally that the only way L'Jarius Sneed stays with the Chiefs is through the franchise tag. The tag is, I believe, $18.8 million right now for cornerbacks. And I think that is out of market. Price might be higher than that, right? That's below. That would be ranked. The franchise tag right now would be ranked 7th for average per year, and that's only going to go down after a few of these big deals are signed. Maybe Jalen Johnson gets more money than that. So, I could easily see him going somewhere else. But honestly, I feel like he fits in the Chiefs system so well that it would be hard to see him playing as well in another scheme. He's a very talented player, so I'm sure he would. It's just interesting to see how sometimes these big money contracts, J.C. Jackson, right? For instance, with the Chargers, it just sometimes doesn't work out. But I hope to see him back with the Chiefs.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And it also shows that, the Veach and the boys, they know what they're doing. Another late round pick. I want to say he's a 5th round pick. Is that right? Let me see. I know he was, he was late. 4th round.
Fourth round.
There you go. I mean, to have a guy that's basically playing at an all pro level as a 4th round pick. I mean, it's like winning the lottery when it comes to the draft.
Yeah. All right, let's get on to the other game from last week, the Lions 49ers. And man, that was a game. That was a very, very tough game. Alex, any major takeaways you want to start with on this game?
Well, I'm really curious to hear your thought on the coaching decision. So we'll get to that. That I know has been the Dan Campbell
will get to that.
Coaching decision has been certainly a hot topic in NFL circles now for a week. A couple things. I thought the first half defensive performance from the Niners was horrendous. Like not even considering what their offense did. I think it was a kind of a combination of the play calling was superb on the Lions side. I mean, that was like a clinic on how to call a game. I mean, almost every play the Lions ran in the first half was getting like 7 yards. I mean, it was just incredible. So the blocking, offensive blocking, the run blocking was excellent. But I think the open field tackling for the 49ers was embarrassing for a team that, that last year had probably the best defense in the NFL last year. And then this year, I know they haven't been as good this year, but the angles they were taking was like, what are you guys doing? So that was really embarrassing on the 49ers side. And then on the offensive side, I thought that the bad decision on Purdy, on that interception. I mean, there was definitely, he was getting hit and he was in the pocket and that wasn't ideal. But, the thing that I appreciate about Purdy is that he definitely doesn't get shooken up, for a guy that you would think, I mean, in a lot of ways, he had a lot more composure than Lamar, right? I mean, Lamar is obviously way more, 1,000 times more talented, probably at everything than Purdy, right? But I think this game showed you that Purdy, and especially when we get to the second half and talking about that, I mean, he just doesn't seem to be phased. Even if he makes a bad decision or something goes well, it just either way, he's like locked in and it doesn't seem to bother him. And that certainly helped the Niners in the second half. So first half, the first half was all Lions. That was pretty clear. What about you? What did you think? The first half, I was like, I remember texting you and I was like, man, Lions are going to the Super Bowl unless this thing changes. And unfortunately for Lions fans, it certainly did change.
Well, first of all, before 49ers fans get all over us for what you said about Purdy, Lamar probably better at just about everything. Processing speed over the middle of the field from a clean pocket might give it to Purdy.
Fair,
he is pretty elite in that category with his timing and decision making there. But I get what you're saying, definitely. And honestly, it's hard to talk much more about this game without talking about the coaching decision.
Let's talk about it, Cam. Set it up for us.
Well, it's been too long. No, so I know Dan Campbell decided to go for it on 4th down in the 4th quarter, right?
I think it was the third quarter. It was the third quarter. Yep. So it was the third quarter. And at this point, so the Niners, it was the beginning of the third quarter, right? So the Niners come down and they get a field goal to start the second half. And so then at this point, it's a 14-point game. And the Lions are all the way down, and they've had a pretty long drive. It might even be the halfway point somewhere around there in the third quarter. And they drive down, and they're at a 4th and I think it was 4th and 2. Somewhere around, it might have been 4th and 1.5, 4th and 2, somewhere around there. And they're obviously well within field goal range. I want to say it would have been like a 40-yarder or something like that. And they decide to go for it. And they actually, and Goff is actually able to hit Reynolds in stride.
Oh, okay.
And Reynolds drops it. Now it wasn't a perfect like perfectly catchable ball. I mean, it was there though. It hit him in the hands. He should have caught it, right? And so then at that point, then the Niners come down and score a touchdown. And then the next drive, Gibbs fumbles, Niners get it, score another touchdown, tie up the game, right? So I think the reason this particular play has gotten so much scrutiny is because, it's halfway through the third quarter, and if the Lions just take the field goal there, then they go up 3 scores, right? So their odds of winning, and that's what's been so debatable, right? I mean, you could look at odds either way. A lot of the analytics folks said that it was the right call to go for it, but I do think that and it's one of those things where it's like retrospectively, everything always it's always easier to make decisions retrospectively,
right?
But I still think I would have taken the points there because at this point you just stopped the Niners, you held them to a field goal, and I mean momentum is a real thing, and it's like you go up 3 scores with like 5 minutes left in the third. And you're, that is such a high mountain to climb, because then even if the Niners come down and get a touchdown, you're still likely up 2 scores going into the fourth quarter. So it unraveled real fast after that call. So that's been, I think, a big talking point for folks. What about you? Do you think Dan Campbell made the right call by trying to go for it, or did you want points there?
So I have always been all about going for it. I'm very much in that camp. So I'll just start off by saying that. I remember right after the play, texting my dad saying, even I would have kicked it there. It doesn't make a ton of sense. And I get it. I get why he did it. I get that that's their brand of football. That's what they do. But honestly, you think back a couple weeks ago, or a few weeks ago now, against the Cowboys, and Dan Campbell decided to go for the conversion after that.
Yep.
That call that we talked about for quite a while.
The botched ref call.
Yeah. So he went for it on with 7 yards, and we were saying that was dumb. There's no real that was an emotional decision. Now, I'm not going to say that this 2 yards to go was an emotional decision, right? If you think about it. Now, obviously, it's a bit different with field space and whatnot, but the likelihood of getting it on 4th and 2 anywhere on the field, I believe, is slightly higher than the odds of getting it on 4th and 2 or on 2-point conversion. And the 2-point conversion success rate's already over 50%. So that's a lot of the logic behind going for it. If you're 2 scores down and you score a touchdown, trying to go for that first 2-point conversion, over a 50% chance that you get it in theory. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into it with the players and play calling, but that's the basis behind the decision. Now, if that's going through your mind when you have 2 yards to gain, it's different, right? Because it's not like that. Whether you make it or not has a much greater effect on your odds of losing than the situation I was just talking about previously, right? If you are up by 2 scores, kicking the field goal puts you up by 3 scores. I haven't run the numbers myself. I'd imagine that increases your odds pretty significantly.
Yep. Right.
Now, the difference between not getting it in 4th down and kicking the field goal, probably a bigger difference than kicking the field goal and getting it on 4th down.
Absolutely.
Right? So that differential, that's why I think, he wanted to go for it. He loves doing that, but I think it was just innately the wrong decision.
Yeah, and I like the way that you explain that. You're exactly right? Those statistics, it's not always considering the you think about the time of the game, right? Like that, like maybe if it's the very first drive and you have the entire game left and you go for it on 4th and 2, right? Like the odds maybe of you making it are the same, but you're exactly right. The impact on the game is different. And so the thought of, that's what we do. Like if I'm a Lions fan, I'm kind of ticked at that answer. Like that's a terrible answer. I don't want to hear that from my head coach, right? Here's why. That's not the way life works, right? You could say I'm a flip-flop person, right? Well, if you're going to if you're on an Alaskan cruise and you're stopping to go and, and climb a mountain and someone says, why are you wearing flip-flops? You say, well, that's what I do. I'm a flip-flop person, right? That's a stupid answer. So maybe that's not a great analogy, but my point is that like I understand that Dan Campbell has built an incredible culture there, right? That's you can see the guys love him and that he's obviously a very great leader, right? That's clear. But I don't know. If I'm a Lions fan, I feel like his maybe, it's just not smart, right? You got to be tactical, and strategic, and in that moment, like you gotta be thinking about how are my guys going to respond? Because there's just you get the Niners at that point. They were on the ropes, man. They were bloodied and bruised, and they were hanging on for dear life, like. And I don't know. You go up 3 scores there. It just feels like that's a mountain that would have been too high for them to climb. But man, did that swing the other way. Because then once the Niners got rolling, then it was like after they tied that game up, then it like swung so far the other way where I was like, there's no way the Lions are winning this game. Like that momentum had swung so far the other way, it just didn't feel like they had a shot.
Man, that certainly was an analogy. I'll say that. That was an analogy. Dan Campbell, flip-flops, I'm going to get all confused here. But I agree. Momentum's a real thing, as you said. And, 49ers ended up pulling it through. Now, their performance at the beginning of the game, right, the first half, I will say, does not inspire too much confidence in their outlook against the Chiefs. To counter, how they managed to pull it together in the second half is pretty inspirational with how, for fans going into the game against the Chiefs, we talk about this all the time. Good coaching staffs fix their mistakes at the half, right? They play better in the second half. It just good teams do. And the 49ers are an excellent team with a great coaching staff. So, maybe I think if they start off slow the way they did against the Lions, I will say I think the Chiefs just run away with it. But I don't think they start off that slow. I think it's going to be a good game. I'm hoping for a good game as you're a Chiefs fan, so we'll all be pulling for. But as a not a real fan of either team, I just want a good Super Bowl.
Yeah, I hear you. And yeah, and we'll talk more about. We'll have our Super Bowl preview show next week where we can dive a little more into it. But I will say my last thoughts on that before we get into some of these coaching stuff is as a Chiefs fan, I the quote that came to mind when I saw a lot of the social media stuff, going to the game against the Ravens, and basically how everyone that's not a Chiefs fan was rooting for the Ravens, and that's fine, right? And the first quote that came to mind was from Batman. I think it's from The Dark Knight, right? When he says, you either die the hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Yep. And that's exactly what I thought of. And it's like and that is a perfect analogy quote for the Chiefs, because I remember back in 2019, of course, when the Chiefs won that first Super Bowl against the Niners, and basically everybody was pulling for the Chiefs. They were kind of like they had been the lovable loser, right? For so many years. And it was like, oh, Andy Reid, finally get him that ring. And they got this fun young offense and this young quarterback, and everybody was pulling for the Chiefs. And then now here it is a few years later, and I get it. Folks have Chiefs fatigue, and they're tired of seeing the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. They're tired of seeing them win these big games and knock other teams out. And guess what, everybody? That's exactly how I felt about the Patriots for the first 20 years of my football fandom, because, there were some good Chief teams in there, but deep down, I knew they were never going to beat the Patriots. I knew that no matter how good my beloved Chiefs were going to be, they weren't going to beat the Patriots. And I remember pulling for the Colts and pulling for the Broncos and pulling for the Ravens and pulling for everybody else to just try to get them to knock off the Patriots when they were on top. So the Chiefs are on top now, and everybody's got that. A lot of folks have Chiefs fatigue. And while I understand that, you better get used to that feeling, because like I said, people keep doubting the Chiefs, and they ain't going anywhere. Not just this year, but they're going to be good, especially if they get some more receivers. Their offense will be better next year. They're going to be a tough out for many years. So there you go. That's my soapbox about Chiefs fatigue.
I will say in the defense of the Chiefs and people's fatigue, people get fatigued so quickly. I mean, you think of how long the Chiefs were not a very good football team.
50 years.
Pretty much. A few great players here and there. But honestly, everyone was rooting for the Lions, right? If the
Yeah,
Lions end up making it to the Super Bowl in the next 3 years, people will be sick of it, and they've
they will
never
be.
made the
Yeah,
Super Bowl. So it's hard to see now, but I guarantee it. The next team after the Chiefs is going to come out of nothing. It's going to be, could be the Lions if they end up winning a few Super Bowls here and there and
yep.
are just perennial, uh, division winners. People get sick of it
That's
really
true. The
quick.
Packers, that's a team to keep an eye on for next year. The Packers, that's a young team that
That's a
has
good team.
potentially a bright future for sure. And,
Yeah, I
and
will say. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and now people will definitely get sick of that because the Packers, of course, as a franchise, have just been winning for so long, and people that aren't Packer fans are going to get real irritated if all of a sudden the Packers have another really
Jeez.
excellent young team.
Yeah, I will say I always do preseason predictions of win totals for each game, each team. Last year, I averaged being just under one game difference. It was just over 0.9. I felt really good about that. This year, I was like over 2.5 games off on average for each team. I mean, I thought the Packers were going to be bad. I thought the Bucks were going to be bad. Thought the Texans were going to be bad. And some of these, I mean, I thought the Chargers were going to be good. It's been a wild year. It's been a really fun year. And honestly, when stuff like that happens, it's fun seeing the bad teams rise up, the good teams fall down. Maybe not the latter as much so, but it's certainly been a fun year, even as a lowly Commanders fan.
You're right, man. Football is on top right now. Football is king, that's for sure. So, Cam, let's talk a little bit about some of these coaching changes. And since you're repping the Commanders gear, start with us there. What are your thoughts on the news even breaking today? Dan Quinn coming to take over the DC Fighting Commanders. What are your thoughts?
DC Fighting Commanders. Okay, so I have a lot of thoughts, but I'll keep it brief. You know how everyone thought that it was going to be Ben Johnson. I mean, on the broadcast of the Lions 49ers game, they said all rumors say, or all indications point that this is the next head coach of the Washington Commanders. And, the game ended and the front office of the Commanders was in the airplane to go try and sign a contract with Ben Johnson. And he said, nah, I'm going to stay here in Detroit, unfinished business. There were a lot of rumors, including one that the offer wasn't high enough. The offer would have made him a higher paid coach than Dan Campbell. That's not, I mean, you think of who this ownership group is. They are not going to cheap out on a head coach. Yeah. Very deep pockets, came to win. And that's their number one goal, really, right? You think Harris needs more money? I mean, everyone loves money, but geez, he wants to build something. And so people were complaining all of the good coaching candidates are gone. I can't believe we might end up actually hiring someone like Dan Quinn. And I'll just say this about Dan Quinn. People call him a retread, say he wasn't that good in Atlanta. He made a Super Bowl, right? He did make a Super Bowl. And he is a good leader. He is a very good leader. People seem to like him, and he has a very vast pool of coaches that theoretically he should be able to pull from. He has lots of connections throughout the league. He's been around some great people. Now, people don't like the fact that we went from Ron Rivera to Dan Quinn, right? More leadership-oriented
defense.
Defensive-minded head coach.
Made a Super Bowl and lost.
Made a Super Bowl and lost with an MVP caliber quarterback or an MVP quarterback. It might have been MVP, both of them.
Yeah, Ryan was MVP that year. Yeah.
Yep. So, it's not the sexy hire, right? Ben Johnson, what was going to be the sexy hire? Slowick decided to stay in Houston. And I don't hate the Dan Quinn pick. I really don't. It's not as exciting, but I think that if they build a good staff around him and are able to develop talent, then it's going to be fine, right? A lot of these younger up-and-coming head coaches or coordinators who become coaches, a lot of them don't do as well, right? Brandon Staley, he was not good.
No.
Josh McDaniels, right? He was
very
very
bad.
not good. Now it's hard to. I mean, Staley is a very intelligent person. I don't know much about McDaniels, but it didn't seem like he had the right head on his shoulders for football at some times. But he had to have been good at some point in order to get that job, right? So
Yeah.
anyway, to Dan Quinn, I think he's a solid hire who will have who sets a good floor, will have a good football team, might not, but it's all going to fall on who he has around him, particularly at offensive coordinator and the talent that they bring in on offense, right? Because he's not going to be helping out as much on the offense, right? He was a fantastic DC in Dallas, who, by the way, the Dallas DC position, they interviewed Ron Rivera, I believe, today. So that's pretty hilarious. It might just be swapping spots.
Do a little switch.
But yeah. But I'm looking forward to seeing who Dan Quinn can pull in. There are some rumors. Clint Kubiak is one, and then who is the other guy? I think I have it right here. I don't have it right here. Yeah, it was Clint Kubiak and someone else. I'll pull that up later in the show. But by the time you're listening to this, the decision might have been made. Now, one thing I will say, the rumored defensive coordinator right now is Joe Witt Jr., and I actually really like that. Again, he's from Dallas. He's a defensive backs coach, but he's been a defensive backs coach and defensive passing game coordinator, I believe. But he's been a DB's coach in a lot of places, and he works really well with cornerbacks. I mean, he develops cornerbacks as well as anyone. As a defensive backs coach, he seems to have a very strong understanding of the game in general as that defensive passing game coordinator, not just because of the title, but because of what he's able to do in the secondaries he works with the talent he has. A lot of places he hasn't had great talent, and he turns guys into pick machines, right? I've never loved the current defensive backs in Dallas over the last 2 to 3 years. And they've been phenomenal. There's been a Pro Bowler out of that group every year.
Yeah,
so
even Gilmore this last year had he had a much better year.
Well, yeah, Gilmore is also, he's not a rookie.
Yeah,
he's a great, good player. He's on the older side, a little slower now, but fantastic player still. I know he was still in Green Bay when Jair Alexander was a rookie. Went to Cleveland, got Denzel Ward. Right. He then went to Dallas, and he's been with all these young DBs. So he's never been a defensive coordinator before, which I like, right? If you get a head coach who's been a head coach before, who may not have been the most successful, bringing someone else who is more up and coming, that seems like a good decision, in my opinion, just in theory, right? For instance, if we had Ben Johnson as head coach, I wouldn't necessarily want all the coordinators to be these up-and-coming guys. It's just too much volatility. Yep. So I'm going to be off social media a little bit this week because every time I turn on my phone, there is some form of complaining from Commanders fans on every social media platform, it seems. So I'm going to step away for a bit because I like the hire. Don't want to get too down about it. I just want to look forward and see what's ahead for the organization.
So Cam, thanks for that overview. And just a question for me: is EB out then? Is he already? Did Quinn already say Bieniemy's out the door then, or is he still?
Think so.
Okay,
I don't think he said that yet.
Would be in the running for maybe retaining his job as OC.
Yeah. Now I might get off social media for a different reason if that happens. Keep my mouth shut. I've spoken about this before. I've not been a fan of his play calling or his decision making. A lot of his Bieniemy passes the ball way too much. And again, I'm very much on the analytically driven side of the game where passing is king, going for it on fourth down, all that fun stuff. And it's just ridiculous how much he passes. I see routes with receivers running into each other, and I doubt Terry McLaurin's running the wrong route every few plays. So there have been things that don't make sense to me on the field. I haven't liked what I've seen watching the Commanders closely all season on offense from a play calling perspective or a talent perspective, but that's a different issue. So I think we'll bring in someone new. I think this is a smart front office. I do think Dan Quinn's a smart head coach. So we'll see. Maybe they don't like any of the other candidates, and Bieniemy is the best remaining choice in their eyes. In which case, sure, I'll give it another chance. But wouldn't be my first choice from an outside perspective.
There you go. There you go. So just to kind of recap a few other things that we can touch on. So I saw that another news today is Mike Macdonald was hired as the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, coming over from the Ravens, right? So he was the Ravens defensive coordinator. And so, I know they certainly had a great season there. So he fills that spot. Obviously, we already talked about Gerard Mayo filling the Patriots spot. The Falcons, they go with what's his name? I just blanked for a second. The Falcons.
Raheem Morris.
Thank you. Yes, Raheem Morris. Yep, Raheem Morris goes to the Falcons. And so I think now with the Commanders making this hire, I think all the spots are filled, right? Is there anybody still looking?
Yes, all the spots are filled, right? Tennessee got Brian Callahan, right? He's over from the Bengals, right? Yeah.
Yep.
He was the Bengals OC.
OC.
Now, I honestly have thought that a lot of his play calling in previous years was not very strong, and he seemed to, he seems to adjust well. I think he's learning. I do think he's a good hire. I think it could go either way. Not as excited about that as I think Mike Macdonald would make a better head coach personally, for instance. But we'll definitely have to see. I do think that Tennessee going from Vrabel to someone like Callahan is a good move, right? It's what people expect. Go from an
young quarterback. Yep. Trying to get an offensive guy in there. Yeah,
exactly.
With Vrabel, I got to say for a second, I'm genuinely surprised. I really thought Vrabel would land one of these jobs. And that to me is really interesting. I thought I honestly wasn't all on board with Belichick. I thought I'm a little bit surprised that Belichick, because I thought it really looked like for a while he was going to get that Falcons job pretty quickly. So that was a little surprising that fell through. But the one that really surprises me is Vrabel. I really think that he showed that he can really coach and build a culture in an area that, that Tennessee team was so bad before Vrabel got there. And honestly, I don't feel like they really had that much talent while he was there. And he really maximized what he got out of that team. Got him all the way to the AFC Championship game, got him a 1 seed last year, which is kind of crazy to think about as well. They were the 1 seed last year. And the year before that, they were in the playoffs every year. So I thought he really did a pretty incredible job, in Tennessee. And I'm genuinely surprised that there was no spots left for him.
I will say that it's been reported pretty much everywhere that he wants to have full control, right? He wants to be the GM and the head coach. He wants a lot of yes men surrounding him so he can make all the decisions. And while from one standpoint, I understand why he wants that, that's just not going to happen. It's maybe 1 or 2 organizations would allow him to do that. But I know you were telling me earlier today, you were a little surprised that Dan Quinn would have gotten the job over Vrabel. Well, our GM, we have a GM who has a plan, right? Him and Harris have worked together to make sure their visions align. And to bring someone in who says, yeah, I want full control, it just doesn't seem like that was ever going to happen. Again, this is all from an outside perspective. We just hear the reports, read about it, and spend a little too much time looking into it. We don't have the insider information or anything. But, Vrabel, he's not going to fit with every team. He's not going to fit with what every team wants to do. I do think if he wants the job, he'll get it. There are lots of reports that he's going to take the year off of coaching and potentially come back. So we'll see if they're, when the coaching cycle happens again next year, if he's one of the top names or not.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think I actually called this out a couple of weeks ago, but I got a little sneaky. I got a little sneaky landing spot for him.
Ooh,
and I think that there's a chance that that the Ohio State Buckeyes grab Ryan Day and they say, Ryan, thanks for everything you've done, buddy. And they have him pack up his desk and they send him on his way. Vrabel obviously is a Ohio State alumni, and doesn't he just seem like a Buckeye? I mean, like as a Buckeye coach, and I mean, now that of course Michigan, Harbaugh's moved on and
Yep.
Michigan has a new coach. So, and the last couple of years that one of my close buddies, diehard Buckeyes fan, and they are just tortured with the fact that they've lost a couple years in a row to Michigan. That is just, it honestly does not matter what Ryan Day does the rest of the year. For the most part, he just has to. You can't lose to Michigan, especially multiple years in a row. So I know that a lot of Buckeye fans aren't exactly thrilled with him. And so even though, he's an offensive guy and Vrabel being a defensive guy, but I mean, I don't know if Vrabel would even consider going back to college, but I think if the Buckeyes don't seriously consider seeing what they could do to get Vrabel in there, then they're not doing their due diligence. Cause I think he'd be perfect in Ohio State.
I actually think he'd be great as well. I think he'd be just a very good college coach in general. And what I will say about the Buckeyes is they forked out money this offseason.
They did.
They pay. I mean,
Bill O'Brien. They got Bo Bryan in there as an OC.
Well, all the players that are coming back to school,
yeah, but
we're going to declare. It's great. Emeka Egbuka, right, wide receiver, JT Tuimoloau, and then Jack Sawyer. They both went back. Tuimoloau and Egbuka, they were potentially going to be borderline round one players. Denzel Burke, I had a round one grade on him. He was my 22nd round one grade for non-quarterbacks. And he's now off the board. Tyleik Williams, Travion Henderson, one of the top running backs. Mm-hmm, they just brought everyone back and said, we're just going to win it this year. So there were reports that they were accumulating lots of money, asking their sponsors so they could pay Marvin Harrison Jr. That was never going to happen, but they distributed it very well to all their other best players.
Yeah, so there you go. So maybe they just need Vrabel to get him over the hump.
Maybe. All right, I want to touch on just a couple other notable hires. Not going to go through every OC in DC, but I want your thoughts, especially on the Steelers' hire of Arthur Smith as their offensive coordinator. Do you have any thoughts?
I think it's
it's
a good fit. I mean, we just talked about Vrabel in Tennessee, and I think a big part of that success was getting the most out of the players they had on offense. And I think Arthur Smith, as an offensive coordinator, I think he's shown that he's a great I think he's a great play caller. I think he has a good feel for the game. He seems to make good adjustments, and so I think it's important to remember that not everybody is cut out to be the number one. It's okay. It's okay to be. There are guys that are going to be at the top of their game when they're a coordinator. A coordinator does not have to deal with all of the other stuff that a head coach has to deal with. A head coach has to deal with personnel issues, and you could have a player that's got arrested for something. There can be family issues and this and that, and when the owner is ticked about maybe the team not playing well, they don't call a coordinator. They're calling you. You're going in there when there's issues with drafting and the GM and all that. An offensive coordinator, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. Your only focus is, how do I maximize these guys? How am I maximize the potential as a football coach? And so I think that it's okay that there are guys that can be extremely successful as a coordinator that just aren't great as a head coach. And there is a long laundry list of guys that way. It's Steve Spagnuolo as an example. Steve Spagnuolo is got to be the top, if not one of the top defensive coordinators in the NFL. Year after year, I mean, this guy's resume is insane. He has 2 Super Bowls with the Giants, as their DC, beating the Patriots during those dynasties. Now he's got 2 Super Bowls with the Chiefs, maybe a third one coming up. I mean, he is just an incredible defensive coordinator. And guess what? He wasn't a good head coach. That's okay. He knows that. And so now he's like, has no interest to coach again as a head coach. He's like, he loves coaching defense. And he's like, why would I leave? I'm in a great position, So long way of saying, I think Arthur Smith is certainly going to do a lot more than, what the Steelers were able to accomplish this last year. But they got to figure the quarterback out. And that's sort of a whole nother situation. But I like the hire. If I'm a Steelers fan, I'd feel pretty good about that. Arthur Smith was a good play caller, so I think it's an improvement. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you have to I definitely agree with a lot of what you said. And just to bring up Brandon Staley again, right? A lot of people are saying that he was doing a terrible job as a head coach because his defense was bad and he's supposed to be a defensive minded guy. And what's he doing? He's lost everything. Well, no, he just can't focus on it. And he probably got in his head and everything just went downhill from there, right? That doesn't take away from what he's done as a defensive coordinator. I'm surprised I haven't really heard his name throughout any of this. But Arthur Smith, he probably got in his own head a lot. I mean, you just watched some of the decisions he made. I know you were just saying he's a good play caller, which I agree in Tennessee.
Yeah,
he
Tennessee.
was.
Right.
Having Bijan Robinson lead block for Jonnu Smith doesn't seem like the best decision.
Yeah, as a head coach, right.
I get it. I get it. Trick plays. But all your plays can't be trick plays. You have to get your good players involved in the football game. And that's something he didn't do in Atlanta. And no one really knew why.
Yeah.
And there's really no explanation, right? It's like the Ravens in their running game this last week. Why did they not run? I don't know. Why does Arthur Smith not use Drake London, Kyle Pitts, or Bijan Robinson? I don't really know. So I think going back, taking a step back, going to the Steelers, who have such a solid organization, right? Have a great foundation. Mike Tomlin is an excellent head coach. Mm-hmm. It's just it's well run through and through. He can just be there to call plays and work with the offense and do nothing else. It would be cool to see them do well again. You know, this is probably very good news for Najee Harris. I think it's a huge step up from Matt Canada, who he was fired after week 8-ish. Mm-hmm. Was fired sometime during the season. So, I think this will be an upgrade for the offense. I also think Arthur Smith works well in the system he's preferred to run throughout his tenure, especially, again, as an offensive coordinator, when he did a lot more play action and opening up the passing game with the run game, for instance. I don't think he needs a great quarterback to do well. I think if they keep their superb defense, and if they're going to stay with Kenny Pickett, if he's just okay, they can make a playoff run with okay if he comes back to his
I don't know, man.
Old form.
I don't know. The reason I'd be concerned a little bit in Pittsburgh is I think their division is going to be brutal next year. I mean, I think if Joe Burrow comes back healthy, I mean the Bengals are going to be excellent again. Like we said, the Ravens. I don't think the Ravens are going anywhere. I think the Ravens are going to be good. So you already got Burrow and Lamar in your own division. And who knows with the Browns, you know, I mean, who knows? But if somehow Watson plays decent, you know, like if you end up, let's just assume Watson comes back and he's serviceable. Well, then if you're looking at Pickett, I mean, what are your odds of making a serious playoff run if you have the fourth best quarterback in your own division? And that's not even looking out beyond the division at, you know, Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes and maybe a resilient Justin Herbert, you know, coming out of the Chargers. And so I don't know what we can get into the offseason about what options. I don't know what options are better than Pickett, you know, like I'm not saying it's just like, you know, there ain't Tom Brady walking through that door. Right. So I'm not saying there's other options, but I don't know, man. I'd be feeling a little nervous about that if I'm a Steelers fan, thinking about, you know, if you have the fourth best quarterback in your own division, it's going to be a long uphill battle, you know, to try to make a serious run.
I will say this. They got 10 wins this year with three different starting quarterbacks, a pretty bad offensive line, and, you know, a great defense. And they had so many issues, and they somehow kept squeaking out wins against good teams. Mm-hmm. And I just know they'll be a lot better next year with Bo Nix.
There you go. There we
go.
Dude, just think about that for a second. What a crazy year. The Browns and the Steelers make the playoffs and both win 10 and 11 games with basically no quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Like, what in the world?
How dare you call Joe Flacco no quarterback? I know.
The Flaccassance. It was fun. It was fun until it went down crashing and burning in flames.
All right, man. Before we wrap it up, I know I had one other hire I wanted to ask you about. I don't remember what it was, though. Oh, okay. Las Vegas Raiders offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury.
Oh, I did not see that. That's
How do you feel about that?
Was that today? I missed that.
It must have been because I didn't know about it either. It's not what I was going to say, but I saw it right now.
He's trying to get Cliff is trying to get as close as he possibly can to Patrick Mahomes, which in this case is going to be losing to him twice a year now.
Oh man.
I think it makes sense. I mean, I think that it'll be curious to see. I think the guys, obviously, the coach, he really rallied the team last year, the Raiders, and obviously they seem to really come around him. And I'm just blanking on his name for a minute. The Raiders coach, what's his name?
Oh, Antonio Pierce.
Thank you, Antonio Pierce. Yeah.
Head coach.
Sorry, I was looking at his face, but I just couldn't say his name. Antonio Pierce. Yeah. So it seems like seems like a good culture setter guy, and seems like the players really loved him, especially compared to Josh McDaniels. So I think it makes sense. Why not? I think that's another tough division to coach in. I mean, so let's just stop for a second and look at the coaches in the AFC West next year. Right? You have Andy Reid. Whether or not Andy Reid wins this Super Bowl, he's one of the greats. He's already top 5. If he wins a couple more Super Bowls, he could be in the conversation for GOAT for sure. At least in the conversation, right? And then you have Sean Payton, an excellent, maybe even some might argue the second best offensive mind after Andy Reid, right? Now you got him, and we'll see what happens with Russell Wilson and all that. But I mean, obviously, he turned that team around and showed that he can be competitive. And then now you bring in Jim Harbaugh, right? And I think is another great, coach. And so you got all 3 of those guys in the AFC West. And then there's Antonio Pierce. And I like Antonio Pierce. Seems like a good guy. But I mean, dude, think about how tough he's got to be looking at his division and going like, dang, man, how the heck am I going to win this thing? Maybe they don't think like that, because they're elite professionals at their field. But anyway,
he knows how. He's going to bring in Cliff Kingsbury. It's all going to turn around from there.
I mean, I don't hate it.
Flying offense.
Spread. Run the spread.
Yeah, we'll have to see. See who they bring in at quarterback, because that's going to be very important for any team, obviously. But to run Cliff Kingsbury's offense, you need
not Jimmy G.
You need not Jimmy G. All right. Who I was going to bring up before and blanked on is Ken Dorsey to the Cleveland Browns. How do you feel about that?
The Bills, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I know
that's a pretty good.
Yeah, it
good
seemed
hire.
I mean, I think one of the things is, didn't he struggle for a while to develop a run game, and that was kind of like one of the knocks on him, is that he was never really able to get a run game going in Buffalo. And so we'll see kind of what happens there, but I don't hate it. I think it's I think it sounds like a decent hire.
Yeah, a lot of people were saying Ken Dorsey got fired halfway through the season, right? It was after week 10, and I was running the numbers on their success rates and whatnot, and the Bills this last season on offense, from weeks 1 through 10 versus weeks 11 through 18, their EPA per play, weeks 1 through 10 was triple what it was weeks 11 through 18. It was it was.
Their offense got worse, even though they were winning.
Double. It's about double. Yeah, but still significantly better beforehand. Their drive success rate was better in weeks 1 through 10, marginally. But then their play success rate, right, which is basically whether it's a positive or negative EPA on the play, was 0.52 in weeks 1 through 10 and 0.44 weeks 11 through 18, which is a pretty significant drop off on play success rate. So I ran a few more, but pretty much all their numbers before were better statistically, even though a lot of people were saying that, they got reinvigorated afterwards. And maybe there were some bigger plays, but in general, I think that Ken Dorsey's a good coordinator, not just from those several numbers I pulled out of a random database, but
he reminds me.
I think he's good.
He reminds me of I don't know if it's because he's got the whole nerd look going, but he reminds me of Mike McDaniel. They just seem like they're guys that would just sit there in the corner with a playbook and just stare at it for 10 hours at a time. I don't know. He just got that. He's got that professor nerd look going. So
they should get together with Gannon, and I'll give motivational speeches.
There you go. Another thing? I just got to say another thing that the NFL has just killed it on is think about the personalities that we have in coaches and head coaches and offensive coordinators. Like, well done, NFL, because there's such an amazing variety, honestly. Like, and the NFL recognizes that a coach is an important part of the product. It's an entertainment product. So it's good and it's okay to have coaches with personalities. But think about, you go from like, you got like the grumpy, Belichick, you got like goofy, kind of like never really seems to get that upset, like Andy Reid, eating cheeseburgers and all that. And then you got like the nerd guys, and then you got like the Dan Campbell, like, doing roids before the game,
bullying the nerds.
Yeah, exactly. Like what? Well, it's pretty awesome, honestly.
It is
the variety of personalities and coaches. Well done, NFL.
All right, man. Anything else you want to cover before we get going?
No, just to give a little sneak peek. So next week we will, not sure what day next week, but one of the days next week, we will have our Super Bowl preview show. And I think for that show, we'll probably go through some key matchups, both on offense and defense, both ways, and kind of talk through, where we think each team could have an advantage and kind of how we think the big game might play out. Of course, we'll give you our predictions, our score predictions as well next week. So definitely catch our Super Bowl preview show, get you all ready for the big game. And then, but don't worry, even after that, after the Super Bowl, we will obviously dissect that in detail. And then it's just basically straight into talking about free agency and offseason changes, and then the draft, which the draft is Cam's Super Bowl. My Super Bowl is this next week. Cam's is in April. So you want to stay tuned for that.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for listening in. Have fun this week not watching football because there is a little bye, but we will be back with you next week for the Super Bowl. Have fun, everybody. Take care. Peace.
Peace.